Okay, thank you so much everyone for being here. I really appreciate that we have this many people who are committed to learning about activism and improving our advocacy, and that are willing to come and listen to a different perspective. And I hope it can lead to a conversation we can all have, sharing our own perspectives and learning from one another. So thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to talk about framing animal rights in our favor. And there are three main things I want to cover in the presentation. So I want to talk about framing, veganism, and a little bit about speciesism. So let's start with the one we're probably the least familiar with, which would be framing. So what do I mean when I say framing? So framing can be a complicated thing that spans over multiple disciplines like psychology and sociology. But when I say framing, I mean a really simple thing, which is basically the way we present information affects the way people receive and perceive that information. So we can go over some examples now so we can get a better idea of what I mean by that. So we're probably familiar with framing in advertising, even if we are not aware of it. So we've probably seen commercials where they tell us the product has a 90% success rate. Okay? Or they say this cleaner kills 99% of bacteria. I'm sure we've all heard that. So that's a very positive framing of their product. They say, look how well this works, look how often it works. Now they do not use a negative frame when they advertise. They don't tell you the product fails 1 in every 10 times, or the cleaner leaves 1% of bacteria, because that makes us think about the product negatively. They don't want you associating failure with the product, so they frame it in a positive way and talk about its success. Framing can also be as simple as through a single word. So psychologists did a study where they took two groups of people and showed them the same footage of a car accident. In the first group, they asked, how fast were the cars going when they made contact? They showed the second group the exact same footage and asked, how fast were the cars going when they crashed? Now, both groups watched the same footage, and the question is very similar, but the second group that was asked how fast the cars were going when they crashed consistently reported a higher estimated speed of impact, because just using the word crashed framed it as a big accident, right? Whereas framing it and saying contact makes people just think of a minor fender bender. And psychologists even took this a step further and asked participants if they could recall seeing broken glass at the scene of the accident. If psychologists used the word smashed, they could get over 30% of participants to say they recalled broken glass, despite the fact that there was none actually at the accident. So the way we frame our words completely changes how people understand information, even though that information never changed. So both of these examples were really psychological and kind of smaller scale. We can talk about framing on a larger scale as well, so framing for social issues. So it's quite common that people use framing in the abortion debate, and when we say one side is pro-choice. It's a very deliberate framing technique to put ourselves in a positive light, because everyone wants to be pro-choice, no one wants to be on team anti-choice, because we think that choice is a good thing. We want to be on the side that embraces, having a right to our body and making that decision. And sometimes, quite disingenuously, you'll see the other side discredit this side and call them pro-abortion. And that's an attempt to misframe or frame them in a negative way, because typically the word abortion makes people think of negative things. You don't want to be on team pro-abortion, you want to be on team pro-choice. So let's take this understanding of framing then and apply it to an animal rights example. So Wayne Shung, founder of DXC, talked about this as a framing example, so you may have heard of it before. But we're going to go back about 10 years to the city of Chicago. And 10 years ago, in the city of Chicago, they had a debate about banning the sale of foie gras. Does everyone know what foie gras is? Okay, if there's anyone who doesn't know, so foie gras is a particular type of animal food. It's the liver of a bird, usually a duck or a goose. And it's fattened in a very specific way where they force feed the birds by shoving a pipe down their throat. So a lot of non-vegans who don't necessarily care about animal rights find foie gras morally problematic. Even if they don't necessarily believe in animal rights, they still think it's morally bad. So 10 years ago in Chicago, they had a debate about whether it should be banned. Now, those who opposed the ban framed the issue in a very specific way. They argued, why should I, as a free individual, in a free society care what another free individual in our free society puts in their mouth? Why should I care what someone else does with their body? So here's a quote from the mayor at the time, who was not a fan of the ban. So he said, "The city council will be sitting in your kitchen to determine what you should eat on a Sunday after church." Okay, so he saw this as completely insane. Why would I care what somebody else does with their own body? They framed it as an issue of what we eat. Now, this was really different from the framing that activists used and others who supported the ban. They focused on images of the birds, the non-human animal victims. They focused on images of the birds being force-fed, images of the birds in these horrible conditions, images of them suffering, and said, how can we justify making these animals suffer for something we don't even need? So they changed the framing not as an issue about what we eat, but as an issue of who we eat. And depending on which framing you bought into, would make you, depending on which framing you bought into would determine where you landed on this issue. So the ban ended up passing at the time with an 80% vote to ban the sale of foie gras. And what we can learn from that is that this wasn't necessarily a debate about the moral personhood of non-human animals. It wasn't a debate about whether they have rights. It was a debate about framing. So framing is really important. And that might lead us to ask, well, how does veganism frame animal rights in general? Right? Does it frame it in a positive way, or does it frame it in a negative way? Before we can answer that, we have to answer what is veganism, which may seem like a really silly question for a group of vegans in a vegan restaurant at a vegan presentation, but it's important. So can someone please tell me what is veganism? I say I don't know. Anyone? Ethical living? Okay. Anyone else have anything to add to that as well? Sure?
Somebody who doesn't eat meat, fish, dairy, or eggs, or any animal byproducts.
Good. Good. Anyone have anything else to add to ethical living?
Philosophy.
Philosophy?
Or the ideology that you have no rights to use animals for anything.
Good. Okay, these are all good. These are all the kinds of answers I would expect from activists at a presentation learning about activism. So we probably envision something like Donald Watson envisioned when he coined the word vegan in the 1940s and founded the Vegan Society. So this is the Donald Watson and the Vegan Society's definition. So veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and any other purpose. So very clearly they lay out that veganism is a philosophy and it's about ethics, right? It's a position that rejects the exploitation of animals, and that applies to more than what we eat. That also applies to what we wear. So fur and wool are not vegan. You would have had a hard time if you'd walked into a presentation wearing fur, okay? Going to marine land or a circus is not vegan because that exploits animals. Buying house cleaners that are tested on animals is not vegan because it exploits animals. So this idea that veganism is beyond just what we eat, and it's actually an ethical position that rejects all exploitation of animals. So if we think back to framing, we might think that actually frames animal rights in a pretty good way, right? Because we're talking about the victims and exploiting them. So if we think back to our Chicago example, we're doing the right framing, the victim-centric framing, where we're talking about the animals. But it's important to ask ourselves, is this what the general public and non-vegans think of when they think of veganism? Do they think of this, or do they think of something else? And people who have done outreach here probably have a feeling that this might not be what people envision when they talk about veganism or when they think of veganism. So let's take some time now to answer that question, because how it's framed to them is really what's important. Because if the general public has a different conception of veganism, they're the ones we need to convince to go vegan. So if we're communicating with them about it, we need to know what they think it is. So we're going to look at some examples from this past year to give us an idea of how veganism is talked about in mainstream media. So our first example is from ESPN, which is a very popular sports news site. So they wrote a story about Derek Morgan and the Tennessee Titans, who are an NFL football team. So Derek Morgan and his chef wife inspired vegan movement on the Titans. Very exciting. So here's the short summary of it. Basically, Derek Morgan, an NFL football player, started eating some plant-based food and noticed he had more energy, he was feeling great, and his wife, who was a chef, learned how to cook plant-based and vegan meals. right? So then she was able to supply them for him, and he was like, this is really great, I feel awesome. And his teammates started to take notice of how well he was playing, of how good he felt, how much energy he had, and one by one, the team started going vegan, which is where the vegan movement on the Titans comes from. So here's some quotes directly from the article. So teammate, you're all crazy with this vegan thing. Woodyard said one Friday night early in training camp before a Tennessee Titans practice, I'm going to eat my pork. But before the end of August, Woodyard swallowed his pride and joined the Titans vegan movement. And according to the article, up to 11 players on the Tennessee Titans went vegan with varying levels of commitment. So we look at this last quote here, which is important. So this is right from the article as well. Most of the plant-based crew didn't necessarily make the switch because of a disdain for meat. They primarily enjoy how it makes them feel and how little inflammation they face due to the high level of turmeric in the food. So as vegans, and keeping our last slide in mind, we probably look at this and think, these guys aren't really vegan, right? We would probably say they're plant-based. They eat a plant-based diet, but there's no indication in the article that this has anything to do with animals, let alone the exploitation of them. There's no mention of animals, no mention of ethics, no mention of any of that. And I mean, this is all just exacerbated by the fact that they play a game where the livelihood is the ball is made from the skin of an animal, and all of their equipment is made from animals, but they say they're vegan, and ESPN says they're vegan. So if you are someone of the general public who does not read Gary Francione's Abolitionist Approach blog, but you do read ESPN, this is your understanding of veganism as a diet, as something where you don't eat anything that comes from an animal for whatever reason. But we, as a global community, make the problem a lot worse. And I do not mean we in this room, I mean anyone doing advocacy under the vegan banner. Because it was not long after this story broke that Mercy for Animals proudly declared, wow, more than 1/4 of the Tennessee Titans are vegan, right? So we validate this version of veganism as a diet, as anyone who doesn't eat anything that comes from an animal, not as this philosophy that rejects the exploitation of all animals. And it's not just Mercy for Animals. PETA jumped on board, how a husband and wife began a vegan movement in the NFL. And it's not just PETA, it's Vegan Magazine, NFL's vegan movement, and the chef helping with the new lifestyle. And we could go on for hours, but we'll stop at 3. So what is happening then to the word vegan and the perception of the general public? Because I know lots of people in this room might not think that Mercy for Animals and PETA are representative of animal rights. And we might not think of them as representative of what veganism means to us. But the reality is, that's what the general public thinks of veganism and animal rights as. How many times have you been at an event and someone thinks PETA sent you? Or, that we all just report to PETA, like they're our overlords, and we're just drones sent out, right? Because that's what people think of when they think of animal rights. And the reality is, their stories get the most likes and the most views and the most shares. So people that aren't vegan, who are reading about veganism, this is what they're getting out of it. That anyone who doesn't eat anything that comes from an animal is vegan. And this is really, really important to understand for framing, so I am going to do one more example. Who knows who Rainn Wilson is? Anyone know? How about, who knows who Dwight Schrute from The Office is? Yeah, okay. Right, so Rainn Wilson is a famous actor, most well known for playing Dwight Schrute from The Office. We'll hold on to that thought, we'll see. So, several months ago, Rainn Wilson announced to his over 1 million Instagram followers that he had gone vegan, right? And he, in this post, kind of talked about how his wife and him started experimenting with plant-based and they were feeling better. So I took an excerpt from that announcement. So he says, I started to drop some pounds. And bonus, it's supposed to be good for the planet. Personally, I have no moral issues with killing and eating animals, but the health and planetary benefits seem pretty good. Who knows, I may start adding some fish, or some eggs, or some fish eggs, but I'm enjoying the journey so far and want to leave you with a single promise. I will not be one of those asshole vegans who is always talking about how they're a vegan. Okay? So that's what veganism is to the over 1 million people who follow Rainn Wilson on Instagram. right? He calls himself a vegan because he doesn't eat anything that comes from an animal, not because he has adopted a philosophy that rejects the exploitation of animals as far as blah, 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 blah. Okay? And once again, our community is quick to jump on this because we're happy to be associated with people that we admire. So One Green Planet, vegan publication, yes. Dwight Schrute from The Office has gone vegan, right? We're very happy about it, and as vegans, and we're all guilty of this, we share this because we think it's great. And we then validate and reinforce this idea of veganism as a diet, as something anyone who doesn't eat animals, even if you explicitly say, I don't have a problem with killing animals, which seems to just be completely the opposite of the definition we looked at where it said you have to reject the exploitation of animals. Apparently not. And it's not just One Green Planet. Veg News jumps in too. So Rainn Wilson from The Office adopts a vegan diet. That one's a little bit better because at least it says vegan diet, not becomes a vegan, but we're still associating this idea of diet with veganism and reinforcing this idea that that's what really it's about. So is this a problem? Because sometimes people, when I talk to them about this, say it's not, and maybe there's some people in here thinking that we're really overlooking the positive aspects, because people look at the Tennessee Titans and think, isn't it a good thing that these buff, giant guys are vegan, shattering these stereotypes that all vegans are just scrawny and skinny, right? Shouldn't we be happy that Rainn Wilson just exposed the word vegan to over 1 million people who never would have thought about it? And now they're associating veganism with this person they admire. Isn't that good? Maybe. I don't know. We could talk about the benefits and such, but right now we're a presentation about framing, and we're digging deep into that. So what we want to talk about is how does it frame veganism if vegan is just a diet for most people? So veganism becomes framed as a diet. And if there ever was a nail in the coffin of veganism as an ethical position, it would be Google. And if you Google what is veganism, because I don't know how many times I have been online in a debate with someone and they say, veganism is actually just a diet. And I go, no, it's not. Veganism, there's this guy, Donald Watson, and he wanted to transform the relationship with non-human animals, and it's actually a philosophy that rejects all the blah, 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 blah. And they say, no, I Googled it. What is veganism? It's a person who does not eat or use animal products. It doesn't have anything to do with exploitation. You don't have to be ethically motivated. I don't know if that even covers marine land or the circus, because you can go to the circus without eating or using animal products. I've had people tell me that, and they say, well, I'm going to go to the circus and I'm vegan. That's what Google says, right? And what do we do with that? So even if someone goes past and says, I thought veganism wasn't necessarily about diet, I don't know if Rainn Wilson got it right, and they Google it, this idea that it is a diet is still confirmed to them, unless they're going to really dig and find the vegan society and learn about the history of it. So that's what's happening to veganism. It's being framed as a diet. And if we think about back to our Chicago example, why is that problematic? Because we had these two competing frames in a Chicago example for foie gras. We had the mayor and other people who opposed the ban that were going for this human-centric framing, that veganism is an issue between humans, right? One group of humans trying to make another group of humans change what they eat. And that framing was a losing battle. Everyone who agreed with that framework thought the ban was ridiculous. We are not operating necessarily then with a victim-centric framing that focuses on the animals that got the ban to pass, right? Where people see the images of these animals and think from their perspective and say, how can we do that to them? So what's happening to veganism then? Before we get into that, I guess I should note, we're going to look at some Facebook comments, which sounds like a horrible idea, I know. But for educational purposes, we are going to do it. But we are going to talk about a particular restaurant in London that you're probably familiar with that used to be vegetarian, and now they're not anymore. You probably know where I'm going, but anyone who's not in the loop on this, there was a restaurant here in London that was vegetarian and very supportive of vegans. They had vegan options, and vegans would commonly request that they put on more vegan options and express their displeasure with the fact that the full menu wasn't vegan. And eventually the owner got kind of fed up with these requests and demands, and the Free Press, the London Free Press, ran 2 articles talking about militant vegans in London. Okay? This idea that these vegans are attacking this restaurant owner. It was some insane title like, insane vegans attack vegetarian restaurant owner for not being vegan. So that's the story they wrote, basically. And we're going to look at the comments. We really are. I know. I always tell people not to look at the comments, especially my mom. But we're going to learn. Okay, we're going to learn. So this is the top comment, over 100 likes, and some even love. Wish the vegans would stay in their lane. If you're vegan, more power to you, but leave the rest of us alone. Now, I don't know what you think or how you feel when you read that comment. Personally, that makes my blood boil. Like, it just makes me so angry to see a non-vegan preaching this idea of leaving people alone, leaving others alone. Like, that's the ground they're going to stand on when they're not living up to that standard themselves, right? I mean, I'm sure everyone is thinking, leave the animals alone, right? We're asking you to not kill animals. You are funding the confinement, exploitation, mutilation, and murder of animals. So before you tell us to leave you alone, maybe just leave them alone, right? That's what we're thinking. And, you know, it's really easy to get onto your keyboard and just, but we are focusing on effective communication, okay? So with our understanding of framing, we need to understand that this is not a comment from a stupid person. This is not a comment from someone who doesn't care about animals. This isn't a comment from someone who's cold-hearted. It's a comment from someone who has bought into the human-centric framing of veganism, right? They are understanding veganism as one group of humans attacking another group of humans about what they eat. The animal is not present in that framework at all, which makes sense by their comment, the animal is not present at all. Okay, and I have a few other comments. We'll go through them a little bit quicker so I don't get too mad. But everyone should just mind their own business and eat what they want. I remember someone spray painted "I heart meat" on the globally local drive-thru. So it looks like there are idiots on both sides. Okay, so again, everyone should just mind their own business, except for the animals, I guess. And this idea that someone vandalizing a vegan restaurant is the same as saying, hey, can you not kill animals, please? I don't know, but we've probably seen this sentiment communicated to us by friends and family or strangers that say things along the lines of, I get that, like, you're vegan, and I don't say you shouldn't be vegan, so why do you have to say I shouldn't eat meat? Right? People say that, and it sounds like it might make sense, but we know it doesn't. And if we put the non-human animal victim back into the framework and think about that question from the victim's perspective, we see how absurd it is. No one has ever come up to me and said, look, Matt, I get that you don't support violence towards animals. That's cool. And I don't have a problem with that. So why do you have a problem with me supporting violence towards animals? Why do you have a problem with me killing animals and you don't? Like, that just sounds stupid. It sounds dumb. But we can only see the absurdity of it if we bring the victim back into the framework. And we have one last comment. I'm sorry. Seriously, move along. Food is replacing religion on the who's right and who's going to hell. Get over it, vegans. I don't care if you don't eat meat. I don't push my food choices on you, so stay on your own side of the fence. And 9 people felt that resonated with them so much that they left a like and heart. And again, it's just the same theme over and over, right? We see that people characterize the issue as an issue of what we're eating, right? Everyone's just eat what you want. That's the battle cry of the non-vegan. And like, get over it because I don't push my choices on you. And while that may be true, they are obviously pushing their beliefs on animals. The belief that animals exist for them to exploit and torment and kill and eat and use and exploit in whatever way they want, that's the belief that's being pushed. But because the victim is not in their mind when they hear the word vegan, the diet is, they don't think of that victim, so they see themselves as the victim because we're the only other person in the frame, right? So what can we learn from all of these? Oh wait, before we do that, sorry, I forgot. I added the most amazing quote from the Free Press. I cannot believe that this actually got published in the news. It's insane. Sorry, we'll see it right now. So this is a non-vegan chef that they interviewed about the militant vegans attacking their business and attacking their restaurant. So he says, about 1/3 of their menu is vegetarian with several vegan options, and he's heard the call to be more vegan. He says, where does it stop? Will people start demanding more Italian food? This is not a good road to go down. And like, I don't know if this is a dumb joke that I don't get. Tell me, am I crazy? Did this actually, someone said this, and this was qualified as being in the newspaper.
That was the top.
I mean, how is saying, please don't kill animals, the same as saying, serve more Italian food. But that just shows us that this, for them, the issue's always been framed to them as an issue of food. When we ask for more vegan options or demand a restaurant goes vegan, we're thinking of animals. We are thinking of the footage we've seen so many times, the pictures we've seen so many times. But vegan to them is not necessarily about animals, it's about food. So they're thinking about food. So when I say, please have more vegan options, what I mean is please stop exploiting animals. But what they hear is just please change your food, which apparently can be subbed out for Italian food. And that's what's gonna happen if we let the vegans have more vegan food. Who knows what's next? So yeah, that's crazy to me. So how do we respond to these kind of questions? Because perhaps against my better judgment, I did respond to some of these Facebook comments. Did not screen cap that though for all of our benefits. So I would say, in my experience, what's been helpful for me and understanding our idea of framing that we're kind of developing here, don't participate in their framing. So people come up to me, or I've had some non-vegan friends approach me about the article and they say, who are these crazy militant vegans? Like, you're not one of them, are you? Like, what happened there? And they want to know the scoop on who said what, how did the restaurant owner respond, and I'm not going to engage in their framing where the issue is between humans, right? So what needs to happen for me to make this a productive conversation about the moral consideration of non-human animals is to reset the framing from the victim's perspective. So bring the animals into this picture as quickly as possible. So someone says, why can't you just leave me alone, right? Like, why do you have to harass me about eating meat? And I say, well, really, I just think that non-human animals have a right to their life. They feel pain, they suffer, they want to live. Do you think those animals deserve to be defended? Do those animals deserve to have somebody try to give them a voice, right? And then immediately you've reset the question, and now the pressure is on them to justify what they're doing. Because really, it's them who's forcing their beliefs on someone else, and we're asking them to stop, right? That's the framework we need to work in. So reset the frame and bring the non-human animal victim into the picture if someone approaches you and doesn't include it in their framing. Okay, so that's just our last point. So making the non-human animal victim central to the discussion. Because everything we do as vegans is motivated by non-human animals. So let's help people understand that when we're communicating to them, right? If they think this is an issue about food, of course they're not going to understand, right? So we need to help them understand this is about non-human animals. So as quickly as I can, when someone comes to me with the issue that's framed without them, I bring the non-human animals into the framework. So this is good for, we didn't choose the framing of the London Free Press, right? We didn't, like, they chose the framework where it's humans versus humans. But when we do outreach, we actually get to choose how we frame the issue to people because we're starting the conversation. So I wanted to talk a bit about outreach and how to use framing to have productive conversations. One question I used to ask people a lot would be, I'd ask them, you know, would you go vegan or will you go vegan? And they say, no. I said, okay. Well, why won't you go vegan? Is then what I'd ask. And who can tell me what's the most common response to that question? Why don't you go vegan?
I like the taste of meat.
Bingo! Yes, that is the battle cry. I like the taste of meat. And as an advocate doing outreach, talking with friends and family, it can be very demoralizing hearing that dozens and dozens of times. And we start to get this image in our head of non-vegans as these cold-hearted, selfish people, and we wonder, how can these people value their taste buds over the life of an animal who wants to live? And we start to have our vision of non-vegans as this, right? We just think of them as these horrible people who only care about bacon and what they want to eat and not as, you know, considerate humans. But with our understanding of framing, we can understand that the response, I like meat, is a direct consequence of a framework that frames it from their perspective, right? Because asking someone to go vegan, their understanding of vegan is as a diet. It's like my friend who asked me, he said, you should go keto. And I was like, I like carbs. That's like what it's like asking them. They're not thinking of the animals, right? It's the same thing to them. It's obviously very different for us. But we need to recognize that and understand that and then use that understanding to know these people aren't terrible people. They're just, we asked a question where the non-human animal victim was absent and we got an answer that didn't consider them, right? So we can use different language when we're doing outreach. I know Jason has used this a lot, and I like to use this question too. Just, do you think it's wrong to cause unnecessary harm to others? Really simple question, right? Everyone is going to say yes, I think it's wrong. So you're starting your outreach conversation on the same page, finding some common ground, and you can work from that. And of course, you can say, well, you already agree with veganism then, right? We don't want to cause unnecessary harm to animals. And of course, they're going to have a whole list of issues with that. But the point is you'll be having a conversation about the moral consideration of non-human animals, and not a conversation about how much they like bacon and how much they can never give it up, or how inconvenient it is to be vegan, and all these other answers that come from the issue being framed from their perspective. We want to frame the questions from the victim's perspective. And we can see this with vegetarians too. What is the most common reason? What will a vegetarian say to you if you ask them, why aren't you vegan?
I love cheese.
I could never give up cheese. I could never give up cheese. And we have some laughs at their expense. We just think of, we just think of vegetarians like, what is wrong with you? You've made this a great step to not eat the flesh of animals because you think it's wrong to kill them, but cheese kills animals and you won't do that. Like, they're just crazy, and we just make memes at their expense. But again, with our understanding of framing, it's the same thing. We frame the question from their perspective. Why wouldn't you go vegan? We get an answer from their perspective. Well, I could never give up cheese. If you ask a vegetarian, well, why are you vegetarian? Hopefully they say ethics. They might say, I think it's wrong to kill animals. Well, have you considered how many animals have to be exploited and killed for dairy? Have you considered the cows that when they're no longer profitably creating milk, they are killed and sold for beef, which you're obviously clearly against? And I can tell you that will greatly minimize the amount of people you have to hear how much they like cheese. Because it's very hard for someone to think of a cow suffering and being killed, especially a vegetarian who's already should be against that, and say, ooh, I care about the cows, but I really like cheese. Like, that is not as common. You might still have it happen, but it's much less common. So we can use this understanding of framing to frame questions to get the answers we want, have the conversations we want, which is conversations about the moral consideration of non-human animals. Okay, and for the last part of the presentation, so we've been talking about veganism a lot, and we've talked about maybe some of the obstacles with using the word. Because so many people think of it as a diet, we're constantly bumping up against this issue of framing it as a diet when we talk to people about veganism, right? So my personal favorite tool for getting around this and to utilize framing to my advantage is to talk about speciesism. I love talking about speciesism with people for outreach. I really do. Because speciesism frames the issue from the victim's perspective necessarily. It forces them to have a conversation about the discrimination against non-human animals, about the victim, considering them. So before we can get a little bit more into that, we should cover what is speciesism in case there's anyone who needs a refresher. So we'll do this quickly. So speciesism is discrimination against non-human animals based on species membership alone. The idea that species membership itself is a morally relevant characteristic that justifies being treated differently. So a few examples so we know what the hell that means. If you've ever heard somebody say or tell you they're just animals, that is speciesism. The idea that the pain and life of another individual somehow is disqualified because they weren't born human is speciesism. If you've ever had a friend who ranted to you and hated how upsetting it is that dogs are left in hot cars in the summer, how horrible that is, and with good reason, that is horrible. And then you say, well, at any point there's however many pigs on slaughterhouse trucks on our highways that are overheating and on the way to their death, and they go, crazy, vegan, pigs and dogs, those are different. Right? And they say that's different. That's speciesism, this idea that being part of one species somehow disqualifies your pain from mattering. Okay? So if there ever was a picture that captured everything speciesism is, it would be this one. And let me explain what this is in case there's anyone who can't see it. So this is a coupon given out by Pet Resource Center. And Pet Resource Center is an organization that finds homes for animals in need. So if there's a dog or a cat who has no one that will care for them, they will find them a permanent home to be taken care of. So let's say you adopt a dog from Pet Resource Center. They say, thank you for saving a life. This dog would have died if nobody had adopted him. So thank you so much. So right on top of the coupon, thank you for saving a life. Celebrate saving a life by having a free 10-piece chicken McNugget, by taking a life, right? Because our society has decided quite randomly that the life of a chicken, for whatever reason, is somehow inherently less valuable than the life of a dog or a cat, even though all of them want to live, all of them feel pain and suffer. They should all matter, but speciesism says they don't. So using speciesism as a framing tool is really powerful because it allows us to focus the conversation in on non-human animals and expose the hypocrisies and absurdity of the speciesist arguments. And we don't get bogged down with talking about how much someone likes meat or how inconvenient it is or where do I get my protein, right? I don't want to have that conversation a million times. I want to talk about the moral consideration of non-human animals. And that's what we need to talk about if we want to advance their status in society. We need to push this idea that they are worth something. They're not worth nothing. So we need to talk about them. And the other great thing about speciesism as well is you're dealing with concepts that people are already familiar with. Prejudice, discrimination, oppression. Those are ideas that people understand. They just never have applied them to non-human animals. And I've never had someone say to me that, they would not be a speciesist, but they just love being prejudiced so much, right? Because people understand why that sounds so dumb, because you're working within the right frame, right? That people know that their pleasure can't justify discriminating against another individual. Now, they might think that animals are justified to be discriminated against, and that's what your conversation is going to be about, but you cut through those kind of objections. I've never had someone say to me, it's fine, you discriminate against who you want to discriminate against, and I'll discriminate against whoever I want to, right? I've never had someone say that, but I have had so many people walk away from an outreach conversation about veganism saying, you eat what you want, and I'll eat what I want, and let's just go our separate ways. That's not how people react when I talk about speciesism, because it necessarily frames it as quite serious and also about the victim, right? They are forced to justify their discrimination and prejudice towards these individuals. Okay, so if anyone wants to talk about speciesism outreach, I'm here, and just message me. I love talking about it. Because I know we're not as familiar with doing outreach about speciesism maybe as we are with vegan outreach. Reach out to me. But we do have a little bit more. The last part of our presentation is going to focus on messaging. And what I mean by messaging is we've been talking about outreach and conversations via the internet. So conversations where we have a dialogue, essentially. We have a chance to speak with the person. When I say messaging, I mean when we're writing a sign to go to a protest or a march, we're not engaging in a dialogue, right? Someone reads our message, our sign, and that's it. If we're creating leaflets to hand out, then someone's going to take the leaflet, read it, and we're not going to have a dialogue with them. Or if we're creating messaging for our website or organization, what do you see on the front page? So this is what I mean by messaging. Because I think speciesism can be really powerful for messaging as well, and as is framing the issue from the non-human animal victim, because with messaging we don't have a chance to reset the framework if we use the wrong framing. So not to pick on Veganuary, sorry Veganuary, but I do have them as an example of what I would consider very human-centric framing messaging, and a little bit about why I think that's problematic. So anyone who doesn't know, Veganuary is a charity that focuses on encouraging people to go vegan for the month of January. So every December they put a huge campaign out to get you to sign up at the beginning of the year to pledge to be vegan. They'll send you resources, tips, recipes, whatever you need, right? So this is on their website. If you go to veganuary.com and you click on the tab, why should I sign up for Veganuary? So they say there are so many reasons people decide to try vegan. For most, a love of animals is the catalyst. Some people want to feel better about themselves and the impact they make on the world. Others would like to set themselves a challenge. And many combine Veganuary with their New Year's resolutions and see trying vegan as the healthiest start to the year. Whatever your reason, we're here to support you. So try vegan for a month and discover a whole new world of taste and flavor. We guarantee that by the end of the month, you'll feel fantastic. Okay, so maybe we would have read that like an hour ago and thought that was awesome. Maybe we still do think it's awesome. That could be a good discussion. But for me, I look at that and I think that really frames it from the human perspective, right? Like it is a laundry list of benefits of veganism for humans, about why you as a human should go vegan. And I know you might be thinking, well, it's right there in the first sentence actually, Nat. It says, for most, the love of animals is the catalyst. And what I would say to that is, that's still dependent upon the person. Love is a feeling that you have towards another, right? I mean, I don't love people. I've never loved people. I've never been a people person, but that does not mean I'm about to kill someone, chop up their body, and eat them. I don't have to love someone to respect their most basic rights. It's the same for animals. I don't care if you love animals. Veganism is not just for people who love animals. It's certainly not the most important factor. You don't have to love animals to respect their most basic right to live free of our exploitation. Okay, so that love is dependent upon the human that you're talking to. That's an appeal to them. And the rest should be self-explanatory. You want to feel better about yourself, the impact you have. You want to put yourself on a challenge, the healthiest start to your year. You're going to discover a whole new world of taste and flavor, and you're going to feel fantastic. That's like 6 reasons why you should go vegan, apparently. And for me, all of this does not frame us as a social justice movement. I can't imagine someone reading this and thinking that veganism or animal rights is a social justice movement, because I can't think of another social justice movement that uses this kind of approach, this kind of framing, where they frame from the oppressor's perspective, right? Where they say, look at all these benefits you'll occur if you stop oppressing this other group. I've never heard something like that. Like, when we talk about you shouldn't be violent to women, we don't say don't hit women, like you might throw out your back. Like, that sounds horrible. That sounds horrible. Like, holy, no, don't hit women, because hitting women is messed up. It's wrong. Violence towards another group is wrong. It's not about you. And when we say, if we had messaging like that, people would think it is about them. So if someone reads this and says, well, I don't love animals. I don't care about a New Year's resolution. I think those are dumb. I'm not too concerned about my health. I feel healthy. I don't need to try this. Veganism isn't for me. And that's because our messaging has sent them the message that veganism is for humans, right? And what we should be communicating, if we are a social justice movement, is that veganism is for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. You can't just exploit non-human animals. This isn't something that you might want to try and you might not want to. This is an obligation you have to not exploit others.
I have a quick question. How do you feel about sharing information about documentaries for people to watch and stuff like that? Do you feel that's an effective means of communication?
So sharing documentaries with others, I think it can be effective. I think the question I want to ask is, or the question I'd ask is, what's in the documentary? So personally, for me, for kind of the reasons we're describing, I don't typically share the what the healths and the forks over knives. Just because that doesn't communicate to the other person why I'm doing this, right? And why they should do this. I mean, maybe that's a bonus. Maybe if they're really interested, we can talk about that. But first and foremost, what I want to communicate to them and how I want to frame the issue of veganism and animal rights is it's about animals, and they need to think about the moral consideration of non-human animals. So I'd rather share a documentary that communicates that.
Absolutely. Like Earthlings or...
Yeah, like Earthlings, Species in the movie, something that focuses on the animals, right? So it's a good question, but yeah, I think it depends on what's in it, because if we want to leave the presentation being able to think about how is the information we're sharing with others, how are the outreach questions we're asking, how are they framing this information, this issue. So we're almost there. I did pull one example from an organization who I feel like does get the framing correct, so just so we can kind of get an idea of what I'd consider a good framework. So this is from Animal Ethics. They're an organization that advocates for non-human animals, against speciesism, promotes veganism. So they say veganism is a moral position that opposes exploiting and otherwise harming non-human animals. This includes what we do directly, such as hunting or fishing. It also includes what we support as consumers, which affects many more animals. Non-human animals are routinely killed and made to suffer in farms and slaughterhouses. This happens because there is a demand for animal products, especially food products. Veganism means not consuming these products so animals are not harmed to produce them. At the heart of veganism is a respect for all sentient beings. Vegans see all sentient animals as beings we should respect, not as objects for us to use. So I would consider this good framing of the issue because it talks about the victim at length, right? And it communicates this idea that animals are worthy of our respect outside of the benefits you will occur or outside of, how you feel about them. You don't have to love them. They are sentient, so you should care about them. Now, you don't have to love this messaging because maybe while I was reading that, you fell asleep, or you might have had a flashback to school because the language was long and drawn out, and is this accessible? Does the average person who reads this even know what sentient means outside of weird conversations about AI, right? Like, it seems like that and animal rights are the only people who are using the word sentient. But, so there's ways to tweak that without ruining the framework, right? So I'm not saying everything has to sound like this. It's just an example of where we frame the issue from the victim's perspective. And I think that's the most important takeaway when we're doing messaging, right? Is that we want people to think of the victims when they see our message, when they read it. So hopefully what we can take away from today is that non-vegans are not all horrible people, despite what we may feel sometimes. And a lot of their answers that they give to us that we hate are our own fault as advocates. And when I'm talking to someone I can answer, I basically led them to that answer. I asked a question that basically set them up for that, right? So we can look at how the way we're framing our words and the way we're framing our message is actually contributing to the way people are responding, rather than just having this idea of non-vegans as all horrible people who don't want to consider animals. So hopefully that helps us understand framing. That's it. I do want to give a quick plug. If you want to practice these techniques, great opportunity is RibFest this year. So ALA will have a booth in RibFest once again. We talked to so many people over 4 or 5 days, and I know sometimes people might think that RibFest is a really intense place to be to do vegan outreach, but it's actually not. We're in a separate corner from all the dead animals. And a lot of the people we talk to are just people that are just chilling, hanging out at the festival. They're not just the meat fanatics. So I find I have a lot of really positive conversations. So that's a great place to test this out. And if you're interested in that, just let me know, or Michael, or Jason, or Rob. We do have a Facebook group that volunteers or people who are interested in volunteering can join. Our next meeting is this Sunday at 3 p.m. If you're interested in that, so just let us know, and that's a great place to try this out. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Should you still go to the information session for RibFest and if we went to this?
Yeah, we do talk about a lot of other things as well. Yeah, we do post the minutes from each meeting for people to kind of review, but we do prefer that volunteers come to at least one meeting, or try to, because we just want to try to have a consistent message and have everyone on the same page. Yeah, what's up? When is it? It's the beginning of August, August 2nd to 6th, I believe. So we'll have meetings leading up to that throughout the end of July. But yeah, it'll say all that on the Facebook page. If you have that, or if you don't have Facebook or whatever, just reach out to me now and we can figure it out. Yeah. Any questions for Matt? I know I've taken so much of your time, so. Yeah. No questions? Okay, awesome. Cool. Thanks for listening, everyone.
One question.
Yeah.
If someone were to see your shirt, is this reject speciesism?
Yeah.
I guess one would hope they could go online and do some research and
One would hope.
figure out how to I reject species.
Yeah.
What do I do? And they would go vegan and join the animal rights movement. Has this spread conversations? Is it a good conversation?
I have only had one conversation. I just recently got this shirt, but and it was from someone who already knew. It was an animal. Yes. And it was from someone who was already an animal rights person. So they knew what speciesism was, and they just said, "I like your shirt." But I have found that wearing speciesism things does attract a lot of questions. I tutor as one of my jobs, and I tutored a student for a whole semester in a university, and I had a toque that had "End Speciesism" on it. And the last day of I'm tutoring this kid every week, he finally asks me. He looks at me, we're all done, and he's like, "What the hell is speciesism?" He's like, "I've been wondering that forever," right? And then we talked about it, and at the end of it, we have this long talk about speciesism, and at the end of it, he says, "So are you a vegan?" And I went, "Yeah." And it was the opposite. It was I'm going to learn why someone he came to the conclusion himself. He said, "Okay, these are all the reasons why it's wrong to do this. So what should I do about that? I should go vegan," rather than the usual process where you start by saying, "Go vegan," and then you got to backtrack and work through. Here's why. He was coming at it without this preconceived idea that I was trying to make him do anything. It was just a discussion, right? And then he realized okay, the consequence of this, if what you're saying is true and it sounds reasonable, is that I'd have to go vegan. And that made sense to him, right? Like veganism made sense because he knew the motivation. It did not come off of like a diet at all.
Yeah,
so
vegan, there's lots of preconceived ideas.
Yeah, there's tons of them.
Speciesism is totally...
Most people have no idea what the hell it is.
Idea, so it's really
yeah, that's another reason I love it, because you can do what you want with it. Like it's.
That's where all my activism started, was with that species pamphlet that I picked up at Curly's Brewery. So
That's
I read
awesome.
that and then followed the Facebook page, and it all spiraled from there.
Yeah, it is interesting, the psychology of people learning the reasons for, like, you don't start with the end game. And there's actually some really interesting research, or you can stop listening if you want to do this, but there's a professor who, like, does speciesism as his PhD, like that was what he wrote about, and he's done tests where he goes around to classrooms, and he used to start his presentations with veganism, and be like, this is kind of the idea, and then he'd backtrack and talk about speciesism. And he had people fill out questionnaires and things at the end about how effective it was, whether they were thinking about going vegan after listening. And then he tried the same thing, but with speciesism at the top of the presentation, and then vegan is the conclusion at the end. And he found way more people seemed like they were considering veganism if he started with speciesism. Because basically, if you start with veganism, I guess the idea is people immediately get defensive because they don't want to change. They think, I have to change, and it's that.
People feel like you're attacking.
Yeah, and it's that framework again that you're a human who's attacking me as a human, like the human-centric framing. Whereas if we start with speciesism, they're just thinking about how should I be considering this victim, this individual with this non-human, and they don't realize the implications of it. They don't realize how's my life going to change if I actually have to consider this being until you get them at the end and you say, you have to go vegan now.
So would you say that the word veganism might be like similar to these non-vegans like to like a car crash? Is that what you're saying?
I hadn't actually made that connection, but it's the same idea that I think the word immediately just frames it as a diet. People think about when you say vegan, people immediately trigger and think, oh, you're someone who doesn't eat this, this, and this, right? Like that's people's conception of it. And then once they're thinking about diet, they're thinking about, oh, you're trying to change my diet. Whereas I find if I ask people, do you know what speciesism is? They're like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And then you're just having a conversation about the moral consideration of non-human animals. And they don't realize that they're gonna have to change if they believe that. So
not necessarily about what, but how it's being said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think about the activists who hand out the cards saying, take the challenge, 22-day challenge?
Yeah, I really struggle with that one because I obviously see there's a lot of pragmatic benefit to it, right? Like, if someone's saying, okay, I agree with you, what do I do? We want to hand them something. Challenge 22, in case anyone doesn't know, it's similar to Veganuary, but it's a website where you get a mentor and recipes and resources sent to you if you sign up, and they give you 22 days of vegan education, basically. I'm a little torn on it because I think it does undermine us as a social justice movement in a way, because again, it's this idea that it's a challenge. We would never challenge someone like, don't be racist or don't discriminate for 22 days, see how it feels, and then see if you want to keep going. Like, that's weird. That's weird. But also these different issues of oppression can't be mindlessly compared, right? Like, most people are practicing speciesism, whether they realize it or not, 3 times a day at least with food. So there is value in breaking people out of that, right? That's not necessarily the same as issues of racism where you're participating in racism 3 times a day explicitly. So
That usually comes after a discussion, hopefully.
yeah, so I'm definitely not inherently against it. I just think it's something to consider, I guess. Yeah.
It's a little greenwashing, kind of, in the way of
Yeah.
veganism.
Yeah. I mean,
Should we just say, come out to the safe movement instead?
I don't know. That's also interesting. I know we've discussed that a bit, but this idea of trying to just convince people to start with activism, and then once we have activists, they'll kind of recognize and come to the conclusion themselves that they should be vegan. I think it's interesting. I don't know. Have we convinced anyone to do that?
Yeah, sure, why not? Everything's possible.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we could try it. Sure. I mean, these are the kind of things we can think about and strategies we can think about when we are thinking about framing in our message. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
One time I leafleted for vegan outreach, and I was at a college campus and a volunteer joined us, and she leafleted for 6 hours. Really awesome. Handed out a lot of leaflets, and at the end of the day we were talking, and she's not, at the time, it wasn't vegan, she ate animals.
Yeah.
But she did a lot of activism. And
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. I've heard stories like that of these people that, and a lot of the time they eventually do go vegan because it's really hard to be part of a community that cares about animals and not care about animals. And we almost use social pressure to our advantage usually when it's so much against us. And when someone's part of this community, there's a pressure to care about animals, which is really interesting. So yeah, I don't know. All right, so we good? Okay.